Hernandez, indictment BRCR 2013-0983. The Honorable E. Susan Garsh presiding.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Have any of you seen or heard or read or overheard anything at all about this case or about Mr. Hernandez since I last inquired? There are no firm responses. Have any of you discussed this case in any way, shape, or form, or Mr. Hernandez, with anyone at all since I last inquired? There are no firm responses. And have any of you had any difficulty following any of my instructions not to talk about or otherwise in any fashion communicate about, not to look at or to listen to or do any research about this case, anything you think could be relevant to the case or Mr. Hernandez since I last inquired? There are no firm responses. You may resume.
Just have a second.
Ma'am, you understand that you're still on the road?
Yes.
Good morning, Ms. Biagiotti.
Good morning.
Do you recall that when we left off on Friday afternoon that we were in the middle of cross-examination?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, has anybody talked to you or tried to talk to you about your testimony since we were here Friday afternoon?
No, I spoke with ADA Bill McCauley this morning, but no other than that.
I'm sorry?
I did speak with ADA Bill McCauley this morning, but other than that, no.
Okay. And with respect to your conversation with Assistant District Attorney McCauley, was that about your testimony?
Generally.
Okay. And generally, what did he say to you about your testimony?
Specifically, I can't recall.
Well, how long ago was that conversation?
This morning.
So within the last hour?
Yes.
Okay. And you're telling us that you can't recall what he told you?
We spoke about some of the questions that he might bring up on redirect.
Okay. And did he say anything to you about what you had said on Friday during cross-examination?
Not specifically.
Well, did he say anything to you generally about what you had said, what you had testified to before in this courtroom on cross-examination Friday afternoon?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So your conversation with him was on the subject of what he was going to ask you on redirect examination?
Yes.
Okay. And did he discuss with you what he wanted you to say on redirect examination?
No.
Okay. He just gave you a preview of what he was going to ask you about?
Yes.
Okay. And other than that conversation that you just told us about, has anyone else either talked to you or tried to talk to you since Friday afternoon about your testimony?
No.
Okay. Now, let's get back to that hair on the towel, okay?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you told us that when you tested the hair on the towel, your conclusion was that there was either no human DNA or insufficient human DNA to continue with the testing process, right?
Yes, regarding the hair, it contained no detectable human DNA.
Okay. And am I correct, based on your lab notes there, that you started with 13 microliters of DNA extract from the hair?
Yes.
Okay. So you had 13, and you used 2 of those microliters in what you call the quantitation step, right?
Yes, 2 microliters go into the quantitation step.
Right, and that's standard under your lab's protocols, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you took 2 out of the 13 basically to see what you had.
Yes.
Okay. And after you did that, you had 11 microliters of extract left, right?
Technically, after that, it would have been 10 microliters left. We
Okay.
aliquot out 3 microliters for the step, just to make sure there's enough.
I see. Okay. So you took out 3 and then you used 2.
Yes.
Okay. So after you, and that was as far as you got with this hair, right?
Yes, it stopped
Okay.
at the quantitation step.
Okay. So when you finished what you were doing with the hair on the towel, there were 10 microliters of extract left.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you could have sent that remaining 10 microliters of extract to an outside laboratory to conduct mitochondrial testing, couldn't you?
At the time,
Could you answer my question, ma'am? Could you have done that?
Your Honor, here she's trying to answer the question.
Overall, a chance to answer the question that's asked, not a different question or not explain something.
I'll give you a chance to explain in a minute, Ms. Bijotti. Can you please answer my question? Could your laboratory have sent the remaining 10 microliters of extract from the hair to an outside laboratory which conducts mitochondrial testing?
yes, that's possible.
Okay. And that didn't happen, right?
No.
Okay. And now, as a forensic scientist, you know something about mitochondria, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is it fair to say that, and the kind of DNA testing that you guys do is called nuclear DNA testing, right?
Yes.
Okay. And it's called, and that doesn't have to do with nuclear weapons. It has to do with the fact that that there's one nucleus in every cell that you're interested in obtaining DNA from, right?
Yes.
Okay. But every cell also contains, does it not, up to 1,000 or so mitochondria.
I don't know a specific number. I don't know the answer to that.
All right. But would you agree with me it's a lot more than one?
No, I really don't know how many mitochondria are in each cell.
Okay. Do you know whether each mitochondria contains a circular chromosome?
Yes.
Okay. Does it?
Yes.
Okay. And inside that circular chromosome, there's DNA, right?
Yes.
And that's what mitochondrial DNA testing focuses on, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is Cellmark Laboratory in Texas one of the outside labs that that your lab uses from time to time for outside testing?
Yes.
Okay. And is Cellmark considered to be a reputable national testing laboratory?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, if you know, does your laboratory have a contract with Cellmark?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Now, when you do this testing, you need certain equipment, right?
Yes.
Okay. And with each evidence sample that you test, I mean, you don't start from scratch in coming up with the different chemicals that you add to the DNA to go through all those steps, right?
No, we followed our protocols and procedures.
Okay. But in addition to that, you use basically prepackaged kits to conduct this testing, right?
Yes.
Okay. And those prepackaged kits are what you use every time you go through the amplification process, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the kit that you use in your laboratory is called Identifiler, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Identifiler is a kit made by a company called Applied Biosystems, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Identifiler is a particular DNA testing kit that's been around for a while, right?
Yes.
All right. And in fact, there are several more up-to-date kits that have been introduced to testing laboratories since Identifiler came on the market, right?
Yes, there are newer kits.
Okay. So since Identifiler was introduced a number of years ago, there's been a kit called Minifiler, right?
Yes.
And then since Minifiler, there's been a newer kit called Identifiler Plus, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Identifiler Plus is more sensitive than Identifiler, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And if you know, is it fair to say that most laboratories, most DNA testing laboratories in the United States of America at this point use Identifiler Plus, the newer kit, as opposed to Identifiler, the older kit?
I don't know that.
Okay. But your lab still uses the older kit Identifiler?
Yes.
Okay. You haven't switched over yet?
Correct.
And in addition to the kit that you use, when you get to the last stage of this testing, you refer to it as CE, right?
Yes.
And CE is short for capillary electrophoresis?
Yes.
All right. And is it fair to say, in a lay sense, that that is the step where the DNA is run through a machine which essentially detects the alleles that are present at each of those different spots or loci that you told us about on direct examination?
That's correct.
Okay. And there were different machines on the market to do the CE step, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the kind of machine that and the machines are also, coincidentally or not, made by Applied Biosystems, right?
They are, yes.
Okay. And the machine that you use in your laboratory, you got 3 of them actually, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the model number on those machines is 3130, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the 3130 model machine, that's been around for a few years, right?
Yes.
Okay. And there's a more up-to-date model on the market called a 3500, right?
Yes.
And the 3500 model machine is more sensitive than the 3130 machine, isn't it?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. But your lab is still using the older model, the 3130, right?
Yes.
You haven't switched over yet.
We have not.
Now, let me ask you some questions about, I remember you testified in direct examination about this marijuana cigarette butt, right?
Yes.
Okay. And it's fair to say, based on your testimony, it was something about quadrillion. That was the number that you were being asked about, or that you were testifying about?
Yes.
You were asked by Mr. McCauley how many zeros a quadrillion has. Remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Is it fair to say that, based on your analysis, that there is a very high probability, very, very, very high probability, that that marijuana cigarette butt contains a mixture of Aaron Hernandez's DNA and Odin Lloyd's DNA?
Yes.
Okay. And would you agree with me that that finding is consistent with 2 people sharing a marijuana cigarette?
Yes.
All right. And Mr. Ejadi, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 295. You recognize that as the marijuana cigarette butt that you tested?
Yes.
Okay. And I think you told us that, there's a ruler right there, it's around this butt is around 2 inches long?
Yes.
Okay, and it's burned at one end?
Yes.
Okay. And now let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit 18. Would you agree with me that the items depicted in that exhibit appear to be significantly longer than 2 inches? If you can tell.
Without a scale, I really can't judge.
Okay, fair enough. Well, getting back to 295, would you agree with me that at least some portion of this marijuana cigarette butt appears to have been smoked?
Yes.
All right. And now, from your testing, you can't tell, can you, when the DNA was deposited on that cigarette butt, can you?
That's correct.
Okay. All you can tell us is that it was deposited sometime, right?
Yes.
So, assuming that Aaron Hernandez's DNA is on that cigarette butt, you don't know when he put his DNA on that cigarette butt, do you?
Correct.
Okay. And assuming that Odin Lloyd's DNA is also on that cigarette butt, you can't tell us when Odin Lloyd put his DNA on that cigarette butt, can you?
No, I cannot.
Okay. And similarly, you can't tell us where that cigarette butt was when anybody put their mouth on that cigarette butt, can you?
Correct.
Okay. It wasn't necessarily, the DNA wasn't necessarily deposited on the cigarette butt where it happened to be found, right?
That's fair.
Okay. So, for example, so you've no idea, for example, who smoked it first, right?
Correct.
And you don't know when or where it was smoked, right?
Correct.
And you don't know who smoked it last.
Correct.
You can't tell us from your testing anything about the circumstances in which individuals placed their DNA on that particular item, right?
Correct.
And it wouldn't be appropriate for you to speculate, would it?
Correct.
I have no further questions, Shirley.
Ma'am, Mr. Sullivan asked you questions about the DNA. If somebody licked the rolling paper, that would presumably leave DNA on it, is that right?
Yes.
So it wouldn't necessarily require smoking, two people smoking, to create a mixture?
Correct.
Okay. And he had asked you about your statistical findings, and Mr. Hernandez's DNA was in the quadrillions, is that right?
Correct.
And Mr. Lloyd was 1 in 1.17 million?
In the millions, yes.
Okay. And with regard to mitochondrial DNA, do you know what is necessary to for the suitability of it testing for DNA, mitochondrial?
Generally, when it comes to mitochondrial DNA, it needs to be extracted in a clean lab, in a lab space specifically designed for mitochondrial testing, which is something that we don't have at our lab.
Okay. And in fact, you did nuclear testing?
Yes.
And do you know whether your testing, the nuclear DNA testing that you conducted, would have precluded mitochondrial DNA?
I don't know if it would have precluded it.
Okay. And with regard to the sensitivity of your machinery, did you have any problems detecting the defendant's DNA on the marijuana cigarette?
No, there was no problem.
Okay. And let me ask you this. To test if you want to find whether there's DNA on a shell casing, what do you test?
We test the shell casing, swabs of it.
And that was done in this case with regard to the shell casing that was described as Enterprise, recovered from Enterprise Rental?
Yes.
And when you tested that, you determined there to be a partial profile?
Yes.
And a partial meaning that at the certain locations, there were certain alleles found at certain locations, is that right?
Yes.
And how many locations did you find alleles at?
Specifically, sorry, 1 second. Eight locations.
Okay, 8 out of how many?
16.
And so as a result of that, and out of those 8, were they all full, meaning 2 alleles at each location, or did you have 2 that had one showing information, another incomplete?
Yes, there was one that was incomplete, and we also did have some of the stars, the low-level pieces of DNA.
Okay. So at those, so you essentially had 6 full ones, meaning 2 alleles, and then 1 with the star and 1 with an incomplete. If I stated that accurately.
Would be 4 were complete,
Okay.
and then 2 were incomplete, and 2 additional ones with just 1 star.
Okay. And from that, you were able to generate a partial profile.
Yes.
And that was consistent with Mr. Hernandez's DNA to the extent that you said 1 in 700 or 800. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, when you examined that partial profile, were you able to determine whether that was a single source or whether that was a mixture?
This was a single source profile.
And as a single source profile, the other day Mr. Sultan asked you about, well, a hypothetical, where if you had a shell casing that had no DNA on it, and you had then a piece of gum that had DNA on it, and it was applied to it, there's the possibility that there would be a transfer of DNA from the gum to the shell casing. Is that right?
Yes.
And that would presume that there the DNA actually was transferred.
Yes.
But that partial profile then would be a representative of the DNA on the gum.
That's what I would expect.
Because if it's a single source, and the hypothetical that you were given, the only way, if you assume there was no DNA on the shell casing before the gum was applied to it, those 2 things would be the same.
That's what I would expect.
Okay. Now, there is another scenario that I don't know was taken up the other day, but to the extent that being one possibility, the other possibility is that DNA was already on the shell casing. Is that right?
Yes.
And therefore, some third party applying a piece of gum later didn't, if you assume that didn't transfer DNA to the shell casing, your testing then would be reflective of the DNA that was on there in the first instance.
Yes.
Okay. Now, with regard to you, Mr. Sultan had asked you about, well, did you know about the gum being applied? Would that knowledge have changed anything about the manner in which you went about conducting your testing?
No, it would not.
Did it change anything about the results that you found?
No, it did not.
Okay. So did it, to the extent that you found this partial profile, that's what your job is as a DNA analyst when asked to test, to see if there's DNA on the shell casing?
Yes.
And Mr. Sultan had asked you about, well, isn't gum a good source of DNA? And you answered?
Yes.
Okay. And it can be a good source of DNA because obviously if it's chewed on,
Yes.
and captures saliva that has those cells that you've already discussed.
Yes.
Okay. And obviously the condition of the source, the gum, if it's wet and freshly chewed and then applied to another item, would you have an opinion whether that would, the potential for transfer in that condition?
There would be a good potential for transfer.
Okay. And if you accepted as the hypothetical that if a piece of gum was even chewed, but then deposited on the floor of a car for approximately 15 hours, that it would be in a different condition in terms of its moistness than one coming out of the mouth and being freshly applied.
Yes.
And obviously, if you also assumed as an additional fact that the car was, you know, on a parking lot on a summer day, would that have in your opinion, would that have an effect on the moisture and the ability to capture DNA from a piece of gum?
Yes, if the gum was dried out, there'd be potentially a lower risk of transfer.
Okay. And to the extent that you knew where this gum came from, did anybody tell you before your testing where it came from?
No.
Okay. How long it had been sitting in some dry, warm location?
No.
Okay. Your purpose was what?
To test the shell casing.
Okay. We spoke this morning, is that right?
Yes.
Have you ever testified in a court in this Commonwealth giving opinion evidence related to DNA that you didn't meet or talk to the prosecutor before your testimony?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Has anybody suggested you to answer in any way other than to give your full professional and honest opinion?
No.
Now, would you agree Mr. Sultan had asked you about injecting heat, is that right, to the sample?
The injection time would be for the capillary electrophoresis step.
Okay, and with regard to, there's a certain application that you use 10 seconds versus then to 20 seconds, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and he asked you about the towel, and would it be appropriate for you to have used that process on the towel?
No, it would not.
Why not?
The towel profile was a low-level mixture. It was of low quantity and quality, and it was an indication of more than one person on that item. When we have profiles that are of that low level, low quality, there's a good chance that we are missing pieces of DNA. We might see one piece of DNA from a person, but the other piece of DNA is missing. We call it dropout. So when we know there's a high risk for that, it wouldn't be appropriate to do a 20-second injection to increase the height of the peaks because it could be misrepresentative of the information.
Okay. Now, with regard to your testing and your finding, you would agree that your finding, the partial profile in the shell casing, is consistent with the profile of Mr. Hernandez?
Yes.
And to the extent that you could render any opinion, whether it was the gum that transferred DNA to that shell casing, or whether the DNA existed on it, irrespective of the gum, can you give us, to any degree of certainty, which one caused that DNA profile on that shell casing?
I really can't say.
Okay. And was there ever any way that you could have tested to determine, as Mr. Sultan had asked you, about the timing of when DNA actually was placed on an item?
No, there's no test for that.
If I could have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you. Nothing further.
Exhibit 137. Ms. Biagiotti, you testified a few minutes ago, just a moment ago, that it's standard for you to speak to the prosecutor before you testify in court, right?
Yes.
Okay. But on Friday, when we broke, you were in the middle of cross-examination, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you spoke to the prosecutor this morning in the middle of your testimony, right?
Yes.
Now, on Friday, before you spoke to the prosecutor in the middle of your testimony, you recall testifying before this jury that there is a high likelihood that the DNA in this chewed bubble gum that I'm pointing to on the screen contaminated the shell casing. Do you recall testifying to that question with that answer on Friday before you spoke to the prosecutor?
Yes.
And based on your training and experience, that contamination occurred the moment the gum came into physical contact with the casing, right?
Objection.
Overruled.
That would make sense.
You're familiar as a scientist with Locard's exchange principle, right?
Yes.
And am I correct that under Locard's exchange principle, that principle dictates that when two objects come into contact, there is an exchange of material, right?
Yes.
And based on your knowledge and experience as a forensic scientist, that appears to be what happened here, isn't it, Ms. Biagiotti?
That could be the case.
Now, you tested 6 shell casings, right?
Yes.
The other 5 shell casings had either insufficient or no, not enough human DNA to do anything with, right?
Yes, it was insufficient.
Right, and that's why on your chart here, and this is, if I can use it, Your Honor, a copy of FF for identification that was marked on Friday. In the column, for the first column, that's the column for your test results on the 5 shell casings from the scene, right?
Yes.
Okay. And every single place in that column, at every single location, the letters NR appear, right?
Yes.
And NR is for no result, right?
Yes.
Okay. But on the 6th shell casing, this one, you got a result, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, there was plenty of DNA on that shell casing, wasn't there?
There was enough for me to develop a partial profile.
Well, you put 2 nanograms of DNA into the machine, right?
Yes.
That's plenty of DNA, isn't it?
Typically, yes.
No shortage of DNA in the shell casing that was attached to the blue gum, was there?
Correct.
No further questions.
There's something absolutely new that just came out, but not to clarify anything that is part of what you've asked for above and direct and redirect. If there's some absolutely new topic or new issue that you could not have anticipated, you may inquire.
Well, just for the purpose of our conversation from Friday, are you aware of any rule that prevents you from speaking during your testimony?
Objection.
Objection sustained. You may step down.
Your Honor, let me approach before that, Judge.
Yeah.
Ma'am, do you solemnly swear that the testimony about to give to this court and this jury will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
May I, Your Honor? Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name?
Jennifer Fortier,
And could you spell your last name?
Fortier,
And how old are you?
28,
And where do you live?
Attleboro, Massachusetts,
Where did you grow up?
Salem, New Hampshire.
At some point within the last few years, did you move to Attleboro?
Yes.
And were you working at that time in the Attleboro area?
Yes.
And what kind of work were you doing?
I was working at a restaurant.
And sometime after that, do you have a brother who also lives in that area?
Yes.
And what kind of work is he involved in?
He was a personal trainer.
And when you say a personal trainer, what kind of work was he actually doing?
Fitness.
And when you say fitness, did he work out of a particular club?
He owned his own company.
And would he take on individual or corporate clients to train?
Individual.
And at some point, do you know if he had had a client by the name of Shayana Jenkins?
Yes.
As a result of him having her as a client, at some point, did you have a conversation with your brother?
Yes.
And as a result of that conversation, did you make contact with Shayana Jenkins?
Yes.
And when was that?
I'd say about March
In March of what year?
2013.
And at that time, just prior to March of 2013, had you ever worked either babysitting or as a nanny?
Yes.
And just tell us about your time working as a nanny or babysitter prior to that date.
I worked for my aunt and uncle's autistic son.
Okay. And as a result of having that experience, were you still looking for work to care for other children?
Yes.
Okay. What type of work do you currently do?
I'm a preschool teacher.
Okay. And so back in March of 2013, did you make contact with Ms. Shayana Jenkins?
Yes.
And how did you make contact with her?
My brother had talked to her, and then she had given me a call
Okay. And what was the purpose of her calling you?
to babysit for them.
And as a result of her calling you, did you set up a meeting?
Yes.
And when did you meet with her?
In April.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. At some time in March, well, as a result of your meeting with her, did you ultimately begin to work for her?
Yes, I went away with them.
And when you say you went away, so the first time you met with them, where did you meet?
Mexico.
Okay, I'm sorry. The very first time you actually had a personal meeting with Shayana Jenkins after the phone call.
At their house.
Okay, and when you say at their house, did somebody else live there with her?
Yes.
And who is that?
Aaron Hernandez.
Okay. And Aaron Hernandez, do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you just point him out and describe what he's wearing?
A blue suit.
Okay, can you just point in his direction, please? And Your Honor, if the record could reflect the witness identifying the defendant. Now, when you met at the house, this was prior to you ever doing any work for them, is that true?
I had gone to Mexico.
Okay, well, let me just, so I understand. Your initial phone call, she had called you,
Yes.
and as a result of that, did you go and actually meet with her?
I went to Mexico.
Okay, so was there any meeting prior to going to Mexico?
No.
Okay. So when you say you went to Mexico, were you hired to go to Mexico?
Yes.
And what kind of work did you do while in Mexico?
I nannied.
And when you say nannied, who were you caring for?
Their baby.
And their baby at that time, well, first of all, what's the child's, it was an infant, the child was just a small baby at that time?
Yes.
And what was the child, or what is the child's name?
AVL.
And how old was AVL when you went to Mexico to care for her?
About 3 months.
Now, who went on the trip to Mexico?
It was Shay, Aaron, AVL, and I.
Okay, and Shay, is that Shayana, short for Shayana?
Yes.
Is that how you referred to her?
Yes.
Okay. How long were you in Mexico?
About a week.
And after returning back from Mexico, did you continue to do any work for the defendant and Shay?
Not right away.
Okay. When you returned, did they go somewhere else?
They were in California.
And when they were in California, or how long were they in California?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay. When did they return from California, if you know?
Mid-April.
And after returning in mid-April, did you then begin to do additional work caring for this child?
Yes.
Okay. And just tell us about that work. How often were you working?
I didn't work as often in the beginning. I worked maybe 1 or 2 days or whenever she needed me.
And was there a set schedule?
No.
Okay. In terms of times, what periods of time were you working caring for this infant?
It was random whenever she needed me.
Okay. And how, in terms of the schedule, did you ever work, was it mostly days or did you work nights as well?
I worked both, but mostly days.
Okay. Now, after April, as you moved into May and June, did your hours increase?
Yes.
Okay. And how frequently were you babysitting at that time?
About 2 to 3 days.
Okay. And just in terms of the number of hours per week, do you recall how many hours you would work?
15 plus.
Okay. And again, would that be during the day, nights, or both?
Both.
Now, with regard to where you babysat, was it always at the home or anywhere else?
Always at the home.
And just describe generally the home. Do you know where that's located by address?
I don't remember the address, but if you say it, I do.
Okay. Do you know Ronald C. Meyer Drive?
Yes.
Okay. And just generally describe the property, the home there.
It's kind of on a hill. And as you walk in, the front door, the garage is on the side. There's a pool in the back.
Okay. And approximately how many times would you say you've been to that home?
15 plus, maybe.
Okay. And during the time that you were there, would you ever see any other people?
Yes.
And who else did you ever see at that home?
I saw Shay's sister. I've seen Aaron's brother. I've seen Shay's sister's boyfriend. I've seen a guy named Bo.
Okay. And when you say you've seen an individual, Shay's sister's boyfriend, how many times did you see him at that home?
Once.
Did you know what his name was?
No.
Later on, did you recognize him from a photograph?
Yes.
And when was that?
When I saw it on the news.
Okay. And who did you recognize that, boyfriend to be?
Odin.
Now, the time you saw Odin, just tell us, who was he with at the home?
His girlfriend.
And this individual that you refer to as Bo, just tell us about him. When did you see him?
I saw him about 3 or 4 times at the house before.
Okay, when you say you saw him 3 or 4 times at the house, what would you see him doing?
Just hanging out.
And who is he hanging out with?
Aaron.
Now, may I use the overhead bin? Just going to put number 20 on the overhead. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes.
Who do you recognize him to be?
Bo.
How did you know his name, or who else called him Bo?
I heard them call him that when I was at their house.
I'm sorry?
At their house, I heard them call him that.
When you say, I heard them, who's them?
Shay and Aaron.
Do you know the nature of their relationship?
No.
Do you know what he was doing for work that time?
No.
Now, when you're at the house, did you ever make observations of any surveillance system?
Yes.
And just describe what you saw of a surveillance system at that home.
I knew that there was a camera in the living room.
And did you ever see a control panel anywhere in the home?
In the kitchen.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to Sunday, June 16th of 2013. Did you have, early in the day, do you recall that being Father's Day?
Yes.
And early in that day, had you had any plans to be babysitting at the defendant's home?
No.
At some point in the afternoon, did you receive a phone call?
Yes.
Approximately what time?
4 p.m.
And who had called you?
Aaron.
And when you say Aaron, the defendant in the courtroom?
Yes.
And when he called you, did you actually speak to him?
No.
Did he leave a message?
I don't remember.
Okay. As a result of the call, did you then make a phone call?
Yes.
And who did you call?
Shay.
And as a result of that conversation, did you babysit that night?
Yes, I did.
And what time did you go over to the home to babysit?
7:45.
And when you arrived at 7:45, just tell us how did you, well, first of all, how did you travel to the home, to the defendant's home?
I drove my car.
And when you say you drove your car, where did you park?
In the street.
In the street, is that in the front of the property?
Yes.
And what did you do after parking in the front of the street?
I walked up the driveway to the front door.
And is that typically how you'd enter the home?
Yes.
And when you entered, what time was that approximately?
7:45.
And when you went to the door, did you have to knock or ring the doorbell?
Yes.
And did anyone come to meet you?
Yes.
Who was that?
Aaron.
And when he met you at the door, did you then enter the home?
Yes.
After entering the home, did you see anybody else inside the home?
Yes.
Who else?
Shay and the baby.
Okay. And after entering the home, did you go, if you just describe when you come into the home, what area of the house are you in?
The foyer.
And then from the foyer, if you continue to move through the foyer, where do you go?
Living room or upstairs.
And after entering the home at some point, did you go to areas of the home, including the living room and other areas of the house?
Yes.
Now, how long did you babysit, or how long were you at the home on that date, Father's Day, June 16, 2013?
About 4 hours.
Okay, when you say, how many hours, did you work for 4 hours babysitting?
Yeah, I worked 4 hours.
Okay, and then after babysitting, and so this would have been 7:45, did you then actually spend some additional time at the home?
Yes.
So at 7:45, when you arrived, do you recall how long after you arrived that you were there in the company of the defendant, Shay, and the child?
About an hour.
And what happened after an hour?
Shay and Aaron had left.
And when you say they had left, what were they doing during this hour?
Getting ready.
And during that time, at some point, did they indicate to you where they were going?
They said something about the 99, but I'm not sure.
Now, after about an hour, did they ultimately leave?
Yes.
When you arrived that night, do you recall what kind of cars, a car or cars were at the home?
I know that Shay's white car.
Okay. And when you say white car, do you know what kind of car that was?
An Audi.
And you'd seen that before?
Yes.
And were there any other cars in the driveway when you arrived?
Not that I recall.
What about inside the garage? Were there any cars inside the garage?
There was an older car.
And when you say an older car, just describe that.
It was just like a red or maroonish, older. I don't know the type.
Had you seen this car before?
I've just seen it once.
Okay. And had you ever seen anybody drive this car?
No.
Now, after that hour they're getting ready, eventually did they leave?
Yes.
And approximately what time would that have been?
About 9 o'clock.
Okay. And when they left, did they tell you approximately what time they might return?
No.
Was there any other conversation about that somebody else might be coming to the home?
No.
So after they left, just tell us what you did.
I waited for the baby to wake up, and when she had woken up, I went upstairs to get her, and then I fed her. I hung out with her.
Okay. And when you said, say you were hanging out with her, did you bring the child somewhere from the child's room?
Yes, downstairs on the couch in the living room.
And during that time, is there a TV in that living room area?
Yes.
Were you watching any TV?
Yes.
And are you familiar with a remote controller or clicker, you know, that is used to operate a TV?
Yes.
Was there one in that home?
Yes.
Okay, just describe that for us, if you would.
Just a rectangle, black or gray, not sure what color.
Okay, and you're indicating approximately a rectangle. How many, what size?
I don't know.
Okay.
Just a regular remote.
All right, was there anything unusual about this clicker versus other clickers that you've seen and used in the past?
No.
Now, during, over the next, say, 3 hours, so between 9 and midnight, did you see anybody at the home?
Yes.
At around midnight, did somebody come to the home?
Yes.
And who is that?
Bo.
And Bo, I showed you that photo exhibit 20, that the individual you're referring to.
Yes.
Do you know how he had traveled to the home?
No.
Had you ever seen him, or did you know him to have a car?
No.
And when he, how was it that you saw Bo around midnight on the night of Father's Day?
He was knocking at the door.
And which door was he knocking at?
The front door.
And where were you when he was knocking at the door?
I was sitting on the couch with the baby.
And when the knocking began at the door, what did you do?
I was startled. I looked over.
And at that time, what were the condition of the doors? Do you know whether they were locked or unlocked condition?
Locked.
And as a result of hearing the knocking, did you do anything?
Yes, I got up and went over to the door because I noticed Bo in the window.
Okay. Is there, so the door at the front of the home, is there glass in it?
Yes.
And are you able to make observations from the inside to the outside?
Yes.
And when you went over to the door, did you make observations out on that, out on the stoop of the home?
Yes.
Did you see anybody else beside Bo at the front door?
Yes.
And who did you see?
A light-skinned man.
And had you ever seen him before?
No.
And were the two, did you see the two of them together?
Yes.
And did you have any conversation through the door?
They just said that Aaron and Shay were on their way.
Objection sustained. Okay. Did they say something to you?
Yes.
And was that while they were outside and the door was still between you?
Yes.
Now, as a result of whatever they said to you, did you respond or did you do anything else?
Yes, I let them in.
And when you let them in, just did you have any further conversation with them?
No.
How did they appear to you?
Fine.
When you say fine, just describe, how did they appear?
Just normal.
Okay. Did you notice anything unusual about either one of them?
No.
And in terms of their sobriety, did you notice anything unusual, or did they appear?
Objection,
No.
deleting.
Objection sustained. Okay. What, if anything, could you say about their level of sobriety from your observations?
They appeared fine.
Em, I'm just going to, Your Honor, if I could use the overhead. Just going to show you what's been marked 143. Do you recognize this individual?
Yes,
Who do you recognize this to be?
Carlos Ortiz.
And at that time, did you know this individual's name?
No.
Did you subsequently learn it?
Yes.
And did you when you, how was it you subsequently learned?
On the news.
And when you learned it on the news, or did you see a photograph?
Yes.
And did you recognize that person?
Yes.
And how was it you recognized? Where had you seen that person before?
On Father's Day at the house, at Aaron's house.
And was that the individual that was with Bo?
Yes.
What happened after you let these two individuals in the home?
They came over and said hi to the baby, and then I don't know where they went.
Okay. And during the time that they came over and said hello to this child, did you notice anything unusual about their behavior?
No.
After that, do you know where they went?
No.
Okay. Did they stay in the living room with you?
No.
On prior occasions when you had seen Bo in the home, did you see him in different places in the home?
Yes.
And like where would you see him?
In the living room or downstairs, go downstairs.
And so after these two left the living room area, when is the next time you saw them, if you recall?
When they left, they came upstairs.
Now, sometime after they've arrived, they visited with the child. How long was that they visited with the child?
A few minutes.
And then after they left your site, sometime later, did somebody else come to the home?
Yes.
Who was that?
Aaron and Shay.
Okay. And when they arrived, do you recall how long it was before you saw them back at the home?
About 20 minutes.
And at that time, where were you?
I was sitting on the couch.
And how about the child? Was the child still with you?
Yes.
And just tell us, when they arrived, how did they arrive?
They came in through the garage door.
And when they came in, when you say they, is that Aaron and Shayana?
Yes.
And when they came in through the garage door, was anybody else with them?
No.
And did you then, after they had arrived, at some point did you see the individual you've identified as Bo and Carlos Ortiz? Did you see them inside the home?
Yes.
And what were they doing at that time?
They were upstairs in the living room.
Now, after you saw the defendant, Aaron Hernandez, return to the home, did you see him go somewhere in the house?
Yes.
Where did he go?
Upstairs to his room.
And do you recall when he came into the home how he was dressed?
Yes.
And how was he dressed?
He had a white sweatshirt on.
And when you say he then went upstairs in the home, how long was he upstairs?
Very quick.
And after going upstairs for a quick amount of time, did you see, did he come back downstairs?
Yes.
And what happened after he returned back downstairs?
They had left.
Okay. When you say they had left, who left?
Aaron, Bo, and Carlos.
And prior to leaving, did he indicate what he was doing or where he was going?
No.
And when you say they left, approximately what time is it now when they left?
About 1 a.m.
And when they left, do you know how they were traveling?
No.
How long, well, after they left, what did you do?
I stayed and talked to Shay.
And how long would you estimate that you stayed and talked to Shay?
About an hour.
And so ultimately, after an hour or so, did you then leave?
Yes, I did.
And so approximately what time is it when you left?
About 2 a.m.
And how did you leave?
Through the front door?
And that's the same door that you had originally arrived through?
Yes.
And when you left, at that time, did you recover your car from the front of the home
Yes.
and you went to your home?
Yes.
Now, if I could have a moment, Your Honor. Sometime within 10 or 15 minutes of Bo and Carlos Ortiz arriving, do you recall receiving a phone call?
Yes.
And as a result of receiving the phone call, do you recall who had called you?
Aaron or Shay?
And when Aaron or Shay had called you, was this prior to their return home?
Yes.
As a result of receiving that phone call, did you do something with your phone?
Yes.
And what was that?
I handed it to Bo.
And where were you when you handed the phone to Bo?
I was sitting on the couch.
And where was Bo after you handed him the phone? Did you see where he went?
He walked in the kitchen.
And could you hear anything, just yes or no, about what he was saying at that time?
No.
And after some period of time, did he do something with your phone?
Yes.
What was that?
He gave it back to me.
Do you know how much time had passed between you handing it to him and getting it back?
I don't.
Now, when you left at approximately 2 a.m., had anybody returned back to the home?
Not that I recall.
So when you left at 2 a.m., had you seen Aaron or Carlos Ortiz or Bo having come back to the home?
No.
Now, following that time, well, actually, Your Honor, if I could. And, Your Honor, if I could at this time, I'd like to play some of the video from Exhibit 150.
Objection, Your Honor. Objections overruled. Wish he has no perception.
Objections overruled.
Your Honor, if I could, I'd like to start on the driveway camera at 1939. And ma'am, I'm just going, you can see the video playing to your left, is that right?
Yes.
And you recognize this area?
Yes.
And what do you recognize this to be?
The garage.
And you recognize the vehicle that you can see in this video?
Yes.
And what vehicle is that?
Shay's car.
Now, with regard to where you indicated you parked, where is that in orientation to what we're looking at?
Straight ahead.
Straight ahead, in terms of, say, the driveway, going down the driveway? Okay,
Yes.
can you just hold that a second? Just going down the driveway, do you see now a figure on the driveway?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor.
Can you describe what you observe in this video?
Objection, Your Honor. Video speaks for itself. It's internet.
Okay. Did you arrive at what time approximately?
7:45.
And when you approached, how did you approach with regard to the driveway?
The front door.
Okay, but did you come up the driveway at some point?
Yes.
Where did you go from there?
The walkway to the front door.
And just, have you seen this video before?
Yes.
Do you recognize anybody in the video?
Yes.
Who do you recognize?
Myself.
Okay, and are you shown in the video?
Yes.
Where are you?
Objection.
Where are you, ma'am?
Right here.
And you're pointing to that person showing now in the video?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we could now switch to different camera at 1939. Okay, you recognize this scene?
Yes.
Okay, and what does this show?
Objection.
What do you recognize this to be?
Me walking to the front door.
Okay. What area of the home is shown here?
The front.
And do you see a vehicle in this video?
Yes.
And where do you see that?
Parked on the street.
And whose vehicle is that?
Mine.
Rhonda, the next one would be camera 8 at 1939 to 1940. Do you recognize this area, ma'am?
Yes.
And what is this?
The front porch.
And is this the door that you described entering that night?
Yes.
Does this video capture your entry?
Yes.
And you indicated someone opened the door?
Yes.
Who was that?
Aaron.
The next one would be the foyer, 1939 to 1941. Is that just a different view of you at the front door?
Yes.
Who was that in the video with you?
Aaron.
Where did you go from here?
Upstairs
Okay. And where did you go upstairs?
to see Shay.
Now, do you recognize the person shown in this video?
Yes.
Who is that?
Shay.
Okay. And how about the person coming down the stairs?
Yes.
Who is that?
Me.
So the next living room at 1940 to 1942. What room is this in the home?
The living room.
Is this the room you described where you spent most of the night on Father's Day night?
Yes.
And the room off to the right there, what is that?
The kitchen.
And who is portrayed in the video at this time?
Shay and I.
Okay. Now, ma'am, I think you indicated it was about an hour or so between your arrival and before Shay and the defendant left. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was around 9 o'clock?
Yes.
Ron, if we could go to the next, or let me just ask you this. During this time, was the child upstairs?
Yes.
And was the child sleeping?
Yes.
So where did you spend most of the hour and 15 minutes?
Downstairs.
Ron, if we could go to the next clip, should be at the living room 2049 to 2053, please. Now, is this also showing the living room area?
Yes.
And are you present in this scene here?
Yes.
Just describe where you are.
Getting off the couch.
And who else is in this scene?
Shay.
And where is she?
In the kitchen.
Okay. Now, the area where she is, are you familiar with that area?
Yes.
And is there something on the wall of that area?
Yes.
What is that?
The surveillance system.
I'm sorry?
The surveillance system.
Okay. Do you know what she was doing over in that area?
Just showing it to me.
And to the extent that you were shown it, did you understand how to be able to look at certain locations from that location?
Yes.
Approximately how many cameras, if you know, could you view?
I don't remember.
Okay. Now, if you just hold there. How many times had you been to the home prior to this night?
I'd say about 15.
Okay. And during those occasions, had you ever been shown or instructed how to use the surveillance?
No.
Do you know what was the reason for this night to be shown the surveillance?
No. Do you know where the defendant was during this time? No.
Do you see somebody else in the video?
Yes.
And who is that?
Aaron.
And I had asked you earlier about how was he dressed that night, and you indicated,
A white sweatshirt.
okay, is that depicted in this video at this time?
Yes.
And where are you at this time?
Sitting on the couch.
Outside of when you first came in and the defendant opened the door, did you have any contact with him between that point and when they ultimately left?
No.
If we can go to driveway 2052 to 2056, please. Now, this area out here, do you recognize what's depicted? What
Yeah.
area of the home this shows?
Yes.
And what area is that?
The driveway.
Do you recognize the person depicted in the video?
Yes.
Who is that?
Shay and Aaron.
could go to driveway at 0000 to 0007 on June 17, 2013. Your Honor, the next one would be walkway 006. Next one would be walkway 0011 to 0012. I beg your pardon. Front door 006 to 008. The next one would be foyer 0007 to 0013. Now, ma'am, where were you when they came to the door?
Sitting on the couch,
Okay, and approximately how far is that from the front door?
like 100 feet.
I'm sorry?
It's like 100 feet.
Okay. You indicated someone was knocking at the door,
Yes,
and were you able to see who was knocking at the door?
yes,
Who was that?
Bo.
Now, what are you doing on the, what are you doing here?
I was unlocking the door and letting open the...
Okay. And the individual you you identified as Bo, do you see him in this frame?
Yes,
And just describe him.
a darker colored man,
Okay, can you describe his clothing?
a plaid shirt, red shoes.
Is that how he had appeared that night when he entered the home where you were babysitting?
I can't recall.
Do you see the other individual
Yes.
that you identified as coming to the house?
Yes,
And is he shown in this frame?
yes.
And just describe him.
He has a white shirt on with a do-rag on his head.
When you say a do-rag, what color is that?
Black.
And do you see, did Bo have something with him?
A cell phone.
Did you know if he was talking on it, or could you hear him saying anything?
No.
could go to the next one at Great Room 007 to 0012. Do you see yourself in this video?
Yes.
Where are you?
Sitting on the couch.
Where are you going?
To the bathroom.
Do you recall around this time hearing a knock at the door?
No.
Do you see yourself? Do you see yourself
Yes.
in this video?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see anybody else?
Yes.
Who else do you see?
Carlos.
Your Honor, may we approach briefly?
Just back to what's on the screen here. You see yourself there?
Yes.
And who else is shown in this?
Carlos.
And you indicate at some point he had come over to look at the baby?
Yes.
Do you recall whether this is the occasion or is there a different occasion?
This is the occasion.
And do you see, if you just hold it there. Do you see something flashing?
Yes.
What is that?
My phone.
Now, earlier I'd asked you about, did you get a phone call?
Yes.
Was it at this time or a different time?
This time.
And who was the call from?
Shay or Aaron.
And what did you do upon receiving the call?
I gave it to Bo.
And had somebody asked you to do that?
Yes.
Do you recall who?
I don't know.
could go to front door 0010 to 0012. Your Honor, if we could do one more, driveway 0011 to 0012. Thank you. Your Honor, is this a good time to break? Thank you.
Take more recess.